start off by introducing myself. My name is Joe Malacina. Basically a little bit about me. I graduated in 2012 from the University of Illinois with a degree in mechanical engineering. Not app building. But on my first job, I was offered to do a project which they needed an app for. And I was pretty good with technology, so they brought me on board as a project manager. And that's how I kind of got into this. And from there, I've worked on a couple more stints as a project manager. Now, I'm not a coding expert, so I can't sit down and code an app. But I know how to find the people that do, and I know how to go through the whole process from start to finish. And that's basically what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So if you have an idea, or your business has an idea, or your group has an idea, how to take that from the beginning, just the idea, to the end, getting it on the App Store. I'm only going to be talking about creating an app for iOS or Apple systems. That's what I have experience in, and that's really all the time I could cover in one presentation. So with that, we'll get started. First thing is just some background of mobile app development. By now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with apps if you have an iPhone, an Android, smartphone device. Currently, there are over 1 million apps in the App Store. That's a lot. And a lot are being added every single day. The popularity of apps is exploding, with 25,000 to 35,000 new apps being added every single month. That's huge. And in total, there have been over 262,000 different publishers. So that's either a different person or company submitting their app. So more and more people are getting into this, and more people are submitting their apps to the App Store and getting them online. So the competition's out there. There's also 370,000 or more apps that are no longer available. This shows how unforgiving the app marketplace is. So if you have an app out there and it's not doing well, it's just sitting in the App Store, it may not get anywhere with it. Now, interestingly, the majority of all apps in the App Stores are games, 18%. Second place are educational apps at 11%. And the rest are usually entertainment, lifestyle, and business apps. Those are really the top tier categories of the type of apps available out there now. Another interesting fact, over 60% of all apps in the App Store currently are free. And second place are 99-cent apps. And different types of apps are being created every single year, every single day. And part of that reason is because each year smartphones have new abilities. So for example, when these smartphones first came out, they could tell where gravity was, your center of gravity, so you can do something with that. And recently, Apple's new iPhone has a Touch ID sensor for your fingerprint. So that opens up a possibility of new apps that can use the technology. Who knows what's going to come out with the iPhone 6, possibly in September, or the new iPad. There could be new types of technology in there, and those open up ideas for new apps. So apps are constantly evolving with the new technology, so there's always a market available for new ideas. Alright, so say you have an app idea, and you're excited about it, and you want to bring it to life. First things first, before you do anything, it's time to start preparing. And there are a few things you need to consider when preparing for your app. These include structuring your app idea, availability, monetization, marketing, and team building. And I'm going to get into those now. Structuring your app idea. As with any new product, you need to prepare it for the marketplace. And preparing your app idea properly can save you time and money down the road, especially when you're working with developers. Here's a few things you need to consider. Number one, what is the purpose of your app? Having a clear purpose for your app provides a framework for the rest of the development process. Is your app going to provide users with certain information that they need, such as news or events going on in the community? Or do you want to create a game that will get your users hooked and maybe bring in some revenue later on? Once you define your app's purpose, you can accurately create a monetization strategy and set a budget for your product. Second, devices are your app intended for? Do you want to make an app available on iPhones, iPads, both? Android devices? Will your app have different functionality on different devices, such as an iPad, you have more screen real estate to work with, so it might be a little different on that. There are pros and cons of each market. For instance, more people actually have Android smartphones than Apple phones. But Apple's App Store is considered the established and premium app store of the market. Also, it's a lot more difficult to get your app in the end on the App Store than it is to get it on the Android market. Basically, for the Android market, if your app works, it's going to be accepted. I mean, a good example is, not too long ago, there was actually a malware app that was allowed on the App Store that was stealing users' information. That's how easy it is to get on the Droid, not the App Store, the Play Store for the Android. That's how easy it is to get on there for them. App Stores is a lot more difficult, and we'll get into it later. I mean, there's unwritten rules you have to follow, and it's a whole mess, but we'll get into it. Again, this presentation I'm going to cover just the App Store with Apple and their iOS operating system. I don't have the necessary experience to talk to you about Android devices. Alright, next thing to consider, who is your intended audience for your app? Do you want your app to hit all the masses? Or maybe just one city, one community, one group? Are you looking to target gamers or some other specific group? Answering this question effectively will help you shape your marketing plan later on and even provide insight into your graphic design. And of course, a big question is, what is your budget for the app? Figuring out what it's going to cost to make an app is the most difficult question to answer, especially in the beginning. And I'll get into it more later. I'll have a whole section on cost. But you should determine a budget early on what you're willing to work with this project. Keep in mind, though, that the more extensive your app is, the more features, the more it's going to cover, the more it's going to cost. Next, monetizing your app. And of course, this is optional. Do you plan on gaining revenue from your mobile app? If so, how do you plan on doing it? There are several different ways to make money from your app, and you can be as creative as you want in this area. You should decide at this point, early on, if you want your app to be a free download or a charge per download. Free downloads will definitely get more downloads and more users, whereas a paid app better offers something valuable to the user that they can't get free elsewhere. In my experience, if you even charge 99 cents for your app, but a user can just go on the internet and get the same thing for free, they're probably not going to buy it. If you do allow users to download your app for free, there's still money to be made elsewhere in several different ways. A popular monetization method with free apps is the Freemium Model. With this model, you have two versions of your app, a free and a paid version. The paid version can have more features in the free version, or it could just have no advertisements. So basically, if your free version, you could have banner ads running on the top side, whatever, or limited features, and then once your users like that and they see what they can do, you can offer a paid version in which will have access to all the features, or no advertisements in the way. You can also choose to have in-app purchases in your app. This way, users who already have your app can pay for additional services or features. I'll give you a popular example of it here. Many of you may have heard about a game called Clash of Clans. It's extremely popular on iPhone, Android, iPad, all devices. And basically, the way this game works is you build up a base and you attack other bases with what you've built in your base, and you get resources, gold and such. And you use those resources to make your base better. This takes a lot of time. It takes time to get the resources, such like that. So the game offers what are called gems. And gems let you bypass hours, days of time spent gathering resources. This game is extremely addictive. And you can buy these gems anywhere from $5 a piece to $100 a piece at any time. Now, the way this works is users buy the gems, the company makes money, and it's so successful that at one point, this company was making $1 million a day just from people buying gems. And at one point even was making $5 million in one day. So that just shows how beneficial in-app purchases can make. And that also shows why games are the #1 app on the App Store, because that's, you guys may have heard of Candy Crush. They had their IPO today. It's not doing too well, but That at one point I used to play, it was very popular, and they only charged 99 cents to get to the next level. I ended up buying like 10.
How much did you say in one day?
$1 million.
$1 million.
$1 million.
And that was the in-app purchases?
In-app purchases, Clash of Clans. At one point it was $5 million. This, of course, is an extremely successful example, but there's plenty more like it. You don't have to offer in-app purchases to make money from your app, though. You can simply let other people run advertisements in it. If you guys have a smartphone, I'm sure you've seen advertisements on some of your apps. They're annoying, they pop up at the top. And you can get paid just by letting them run these advertisements. And you get paid even more when someone taps on them. So, similar to way if anyone has a blog, people will advertise on that for you. It's the same sort of model. Many free apps use this strategy, and you can get paid just for showing. A great example of this, actually, and this was in the news a couple months ago, was the game Flappy Bird. I don't know if you guys heard of it. This guy created a simple game. I mean, it was, I don't know if you guys remember the old helicopter game where you go through a cave on a computer. Kind of looked like the old Mario game as well. And it was real simple, it was addicting, and this guy was making $50,000 a day just from advertisements. He didn't have in-app purchases or stuff like that. He had just advertisements, $50,000 a day. And for some reason, he decided to pull it from the App Store. No one's really sure why, but there goes his $50,000 a day. There may be other methods to monetize your app. You can always be creative in this area. These are just the well-known, true, and tested ways. So you can be creative with this and come up with your own way to monetize your app, if you even want to. Alright, the next step in preparation for your app is marketing. How are you going to get people to download your app? How are you going to get the word out? Gone are the days where you could simply put your app on the App Store and people would download it. There used to be a time like that. There weren't many apps out there. You type in the subject you were looking for, there may be 1, 2, or 3 apps, and you get downloads. Can't do that anymore. Now with over 1 million apps. So, social media is probably the most effective tool in promoting your apps. If you're building an app to supplement your website, it would be very wise to promote your app on your social media page. That way, you know, your followers or your users right away have access to it, especially if it's like a small community app or something like that. Another effective tool, which I think a bunch of you are familiar with, is blogging. Setting up a blog that directly addresses the purpose of your app is a great way to get new users to download it. It's also an added bonus that Google and other search engines rank blogs as one of the highest in terms of their search engine optimization. A blog is almost always #1 if you type in anything like, how do I drive a car? There'll probably be a blog as the #1 answer. Either that or some sort of social media site. Banner advertisements also work well on relevant websites. And lastly, and I find this to be very effective, is coding in your app to your website if you have it. How this works basically is if you have a website that, let's say, shows local news in your area, and you know people visit it, and they probably visit it on their smart devices. If they visit it on your smart device, when your app is, or when your website is coded this way, they'll get a notification that this website has a mobile app and just click here to download it. So they don't have to go searching for it. As soon as they access it on their mobile device, they'll know right away there's a mobile app and they can just tap on their phone and boom, brings them to the App Store to download it. Alright, lastly, before we get to the technical aspects of building your app, it's wise to put a team together. You could do everything yourself. You could. But expect to spend a lot of time working on your app. Generally, you want to build a team that can effectively cover all these aspects here: marketing, monetization, which we've talked about already. And then we're going to get into design, functionality, content, programming, beta testing, and project management. And now we're going to move on to these things here on the right. Alright, so you got your team together, and now we're ready to start actually building parts of the app. As long as you have your ID, of course. First things first, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this to anyone and everyone even thinking about making an app or you have an idea, and that is sign up with Apple as a developer. All it will cost you is $99 a year if you sign up as an individual, and you will gain access to crucial information and software. I mean, what I'm going to be talking about today, there's much more information if you sign up as a developer on their special developer website that I'm going to go over today. And it's absolutely worth it. Having a developer account with Apple will allow you to easily beta test your app later on as well, which you're going to want to do personally. You'll also have access to Apple's rules and regulations for submission to the App Store. And again, I'm going to go over this later, but this is extremely important, and it's important to familiarize yourself with these rules before you start building your app, because if you're making an app that goes against their policies, forget about it. It's not going to go in the App Store. They'll never allow it. Moreover, you'll get access to developer forums where you'll find a treasure trove of information on developing apps. You can even post your own questions in there. And you'll get feedback from other developers, app creators, like-minded people. And another important aspect of it is once your app is finished and published, you'll have full control of it if you have a developer account. Now, if you let your developer, the guy who programs your app, codes it, publish the app under their account, they will be charged with the responsibility of transferring any revenue your apps receive to you. And you won't have access to even know how much revenue you have. You'll have to trust whoever submits it under their developer account to send everything they have over to you. So that's why it's wise to have your own developer account with Apple. It's not difficult to submit your app when it's done, and it's just a good decision, because you'll get to see exactly how many people are downloading your app, how much money is coming in from the monetization, and you'll be able to control all that yourself. Alright, once you have this developer account, it's time to move on to graphic design. Alright, if you know what you want your app to look like, it's time to sketch it out. These sketches can be rough, but they need to be very detailed, especially for every single button and function. There's a lot to consider when making these sketches. Every button and function needs to be drawn and noted, and should have a distinct border or image to recognize that it is a button, function, tab, or whatever. You also, when making these sketches, need to have both portrait and orientation, or I should say landscape, portrait and landscape views. Because if you've noticed, when you turn your iPhone to the side, you get a completely different view sometimes for different apps, and these need to be sketched for your developer later on. Now, you don't have to, for example, have a landscape view or a portrait view. You can choose to have your app locked in one view at all time. A good example, again, is that Clash of Clans app. You can only play it in landscape mode. So keep that in mind as well. You also need to decide how do you want users to navigate your app. Are you going to use buttons, tabs, menus, or a combination of these things? Each of these different choices has pros and cons. Buttons and tabs take up valuable screen real estate, but are easy to find and easy to use for the user, while menus can become cluttered and sometimes difficult to interpret for the user. You also need to decide where you're going to put your content, whatever it may be, and also decide if you want the content to be in a fixed location or are users going to have to scroll with their finger to get through all your content. Keep in mind when you're drawing these sketches, and I'll show you one in the next slide, that screen real estate on an iPhone is at a premium, so make sure everything has suitable proportions and is easy to see, easy to read. Now this is a typical sketch. It's not shown too well on the projector here, and it's not a very good example, but it was the only one I was able to get permission from one of my clients to use. And I'll go through it briefly here. Basically what we have is down here, these are called tabs. You may have seen them at the bottom of an iPhone app. And each one's labeled and noted as to what its function is: menu, calendar, news. I think that's the More tab. This is actually a design for a fantasy football app, a page with a schedule. And here he has a landscape view, but he decided not to go with that at all. He was going to keep it locked in portrait. If you're going to make a sketch, make it more detailed than this, please. This is pretty good, but I would like, when you're making a sketch, you kind of want to have your proportions mapped out. How far up do you want this to go, the content to go, the title at the top, and so forth. Alright, one of the most important aspects of your app are the flow pathways. These are the paths your user is going to have to take to execute their goal. Now, an example of this would be to post a status update on your Facebook app from your main page. This flow pathway will look like this. You open up your Facebook app, you tap the status button, you enter in your input, and then you tap post. When creating your flow pathways, all possibilities need to be considered and need to be mapped out. You can write these down, make them an Excel document, whatever, but every single possibility needs to be mapped out. Creating these will help you see if performing any task on your app is too difficult or tedious. It'll also help you greatly when your programmers are coding your app. If you have your flow pathways mapped out, there'll be no confusion, no distinction. They'll know exactly where everything needs to go. Most importantly, though, is making sure every pathway is complete and not too difficult and doesn't have any holes is crucial to getting your app approved in the App Store. If there's a hole somewhere and let's say Apple's testing your app, they go deep into it and they can't get back to the home screen, forget about it, it's going to be rejected. You're going to have to basically start over the submittal process. It's also important to note that it should always be easy for your users to get back to the app's home screen. Typically, you don't want to make that more than 2 or 3 steps. If you look at it in your apps, you'll probably see there's only 2 or 3 steps. But for Facebook app, I'll use an example. It's usually no more ever than 2. You hit a back arrow once, and then you hit the home button. Hardware and software. There is some hardware and software involved that you're going to need during the app development process. Now, if you plan on doing any of the coding yourself, those of you who know how to code, everything I'm going to list here is absolutely essential and required. And first is a Mac computer. This is required. You simply cannot develop an app for an app store without a Mac. Windows computers just simply don't work for this. Apple doesn't let them. If you want to go with a Mac, you got to pay to play. Second is a program called Xcode, which is actually free to download on your Mac in the App Store. This is what Apple calls its integrated development environment. And basically this is the program where all the coding is done. There's a bunch of other little goodies in here. Won't get into it too much. If you're going to be creating the custom user interface yourself, which is basically the skin of the app, you're going to need some graphic design software such as Adobe Photoshop or GIMP, if you know how to do that. This software is also very useful if you're outsourcing your graphic design, because you will be able to edit, maybe text or something, the source files later on when your graphic design team sends them to you. So it's always useful to have, I would recommend Adobe Photoshop for graphic design. Lastly, what you need is something called iOS Software Development Kit, or SDK. It comes with several little goodies, including an iPhone simulator, which you need to test your app later on. Basically, whether you're outsourcing the programming or not, it'd be useful to have all or some of these hardware and software on your machine. Alright, now that we've gone over planning for the app, it's time to actually code it. This part takes by far the most time and costs the most money if you're outsourcing it. And there's basically 3 different categories that need to be coded. And they are called information architecture, interaction design, and visual design. Information architecture is how content and information are organized within your app. Pretty simple. Interactive design is how the users actively interact with your app, or the flow pathways that we talked about earlier. And visual design is the process of creating the visual appearance of your app, or the skin as it's called. And your developer will work to code all 3 of these. And when you're working with your developer, you should work with them every single step of the way to make sure it's coming out exactly as you vision. Have them send you each screen as it's finished, and be sure to check every button, tab, and visual to make sure it's exactly how you want it. And that'll be easy for your users to navigate. Keep in mind, when users are using your app, they need to be able to use their fingers to navigate, not a mouse pointer. So make sure everything's rightly proportional size after your developer codes it. Sometimes when they code it, it doesn't come out the exact size you want. Work with them to get that right. Also, make sure you have a developer allow you to personally beta test throughout the entire development process. They can help you with this. If you have those software I talked about earlier, they can can basically send you an app, you can open it in the iPhone simulator, and you can test it as it's being created. Even though you may only have 2 screens at this point, you can still test it. Alright, now I'm just moving through this a little bit. Once your developer has finished coding, your work is still not done yet, and it's time to get your app into the App Store. And here's how you do it. You can have your developer, like I said, submit the app to the App Store by them, or you can do it yourself. I recommend doing it yourself with the supervision of your developer. It's not hard to do. They will help you do it. They'll set it up for you and everything. So basically, remember, if you do it yourself, you'll have complete control of your app if and when it goes live to the App Store. Again, if you haven't already, make sure you're signed up to the developer account with Apple. I can't stress that enough. Again, if you're just thinking about an idea, get signed up with Apple as a developer. And now, time to prepare for the App Store. And as always, beta test your app. If you haven't already, beta test it again. Your developer has probably beta tested your app several times, but it needs to be beta tested some more. Everybody misses something. If Apple finds one small bug or function that is not working when you submit your app, it'll be rejected and sent to the back of the line when you submit it again. And the problem with this is, it'll be rejected as soon as they find the first problem. So say you have multiple problems with your app, you're only going to know one. Because as soon as they find that first one, it's just immediately rejected, sent back to you, and you need to fix it and resubmit it, and you go all the way to the back of the line. So, beta test, beta test, beta test. Have your friends beta test. Make sure everything is in tip-top shape before you submit it. Furthermore, I'm finally going to get into this, is Apple has extensive rules and regulations as to what it allows on the App Store. Again, if you have a developer account, these are all available to read on the developer page. And that's kind of why I emphasize, remember to sign up for a developer account early so you can familiarize yourself with these rules before you even begin developing your app. And another thing is these rules are constantly being updated, almost every month. So be sure to check them often. Also, some of these rules are intentionally vague, which may leave you frustrated later on. For example, one rule is that Apple can reject any app that may compete with an app Apple may be developing in the future. Now, it's impossible to know. Just try to find information on the new iPhone. You can't find it really. It's all rumors. It's impossible to know what Apple is working on in the future. So this can be extremely frustrating. A while ago, a couple years ago, when podcasts were becoming a big thing, a bunch of people were making all these podcast apps, but they were all being rejected, and nobody knew why. Well, then we found out. Apple came out with their own podcast app a year later. And then all these people who made these podcast apps were out of luck. They couldn't get them into the App Store. So that's how frustrating getting your app into the App Store can be. You just don't know sometimes. Also, Apple is also very strict on controversial content. Another example is there were apps that were trying to be submitted to the App Store several years ago that counted down the final days until the last day of office for both President Bush and President Obama. And they were both rejected. And Apple's reasoning was it might offend some people. Something like this may seem harmless, but Apple saw it a different way and they never got their app onto the App Store. So if your app might offend some people, you're going to have a tough time getting it into the App Store. Anything controversial, and it's a good chance it's going to be rejected. And then, now, if your app is even accepted, it doesn't mean it can't be pulled later on. A great example of this is there used to be a popular app called Hang Time. And basically how it works is you would take your iPhone, open up the app, and you throw it in the air, and it would time how much hang time you got. It became very popular. And people were taking it to the extreme. People would take their phones skydiving with them so they could get the high score. Apple finally saw what was going on here, and they came out with a new policy that they will not allow apps that could possibly lead to the damage of Apple products. So this popular app was pulled, just like that. So you never know when getting it to the App Store. I mean, Apple, they own the rules on this, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So, as you're developing your app, just keep yourself abreast on these rules and regulations. Check them often with your developer account. It's just good to know in case you have to tweak something along the way. Piece of advice, if you're building an app and you want to get it to the App Store, keep it simple at first. It's actually much easier to get a simple app through the App Store and add functions to it later on than it is to get an extremely complex and thorough app into the App Store initially.